Well, hello, youth. So, today marks the beginning of a new series of videos for you that will hopefully prepare you for youth group coming up this Sunday and then the following youth group Sundays. What I'm trying to do with these videos is a kind of flipped classroom idea. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of that, but if you've not, some teachers have started using YouTube to post videos of their lectures, and then in class, they work on application of things. Like, for example, I have a friend who's a math teacher, and he posts his lectures on YouTube, and those are the homework for his class. And then while they're in class, they work out problems together to learn the stuff that they talked about or he talked about in the lectures. I want to try that kind of model for youth group. So what I'm thinking is that there will be 3 lessons per week leading up to the youth group on Sunday. So if it's not a youth group week, there won't be any lessons that week, but I may do some guest lessons that week. So you guys still have some devos for you each day. So like this coming Sunday, there's going to be 3 lessons this week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, for this coming Sunday. Then on Sunday, what I hope we can do is just have a good discussion about the lessons. So we're going to be starting a new series this week that I hope is interesting for you and of course helpful as well. We've done a lot of direct Bible study over the past several months, and of course it's always important to do direct Bible study. But I think a change of pace would be nice. So instead, we're going to start doing a topical study at youth group. But even though it's a topical study, I'm going to be using a Bible passage each week that helps us focus on the topic for the lesson. My hope is to give you 3 ways to prepare for Sunday's discussion. First, a lesson, or several lessons that kind of go together. Second, a Bible passage that helps add to the overall lesson. And then third, some questions for you to use in your personal devotions or perhaps even at the dinner table in discussion with your family. And that all of that to prepare you for Sunday's discussion at youth group. There will be 1 passage per week that you can use, and I hope you use to meditate on throughout the week. And then each of the 3 videos that come out during the week will have a few questions for you to think about to help prepare you for Sunday. In fact, I'd even recommend getting yourself a journal or a notebook or something like that and writing down what you think about as you meditate on the passage and on the questions, that you can bring that with you to youth group. But before we get into the topic itself, I want to introduce the passage for this week. The passage for this week is Psalm 73. So in this psalm, well, by the way, I want you to read this and use this as your devotions throughout the week, over and over again. But for right now, I'm just going to summarize it for you. It's a little bit too long to read at the moment. So in this psalm, Asaph is really struggling with his life. Something really bad is going on. He's really struggling. He begins the psalm by saying, "Truly God is good to Israel." But then he goes on for 15 verses describing how when he looks at his life, God doesn't seem to be good to him at all. And he's trying to follow God. He's trying to obey, but he's struggling. But then he looks around him and he sees the wicked prospering. He sees the arrogant living great lives. They don't seem to suffer for their evil, but then Asaph seems to think that he's suffering for his good. He finally says, "All in vain I have kept my heart clean and washed my hands in innocence." And then he says, "But when I thought to understand this, it seemed to me a wearisome task." He's basically saying it seems like it's a fruitless effort to do good, to obey. And I can't figure out what's going on. I can't understand why I suffer for my goodness and the wicked seem to prosper. Why does that work, God? But then, in verses 18 to the end, he switches gears completely. In fact, he goes into reverse, in a sense. He starts talking about how the wicked will be judged by God, how God will deal kindly with him and take care of him. And he ends with this great hope in God and praise of God. And so we have to ask, what changed? What changed was in verse 17. Remember, in verse 16, he's asked the question, or he's basically said, "This is a wearisome task. I can't understand this, God." And then he says, "Until I went into the sanctuary of God, then I discerned their end." That is the end of the wicked. So I'm going to leave the exact details of that verse for you to kind of think about on your own as you meditate on this passage. But let me sum up what's happening here. Asaph was suffering, trying to be obedient, and looking around at the world, and things didn't seem to make sense. You see, he was telling himself the wrong story. He was believing the story that his eyes told him. He was suffering for his goodness. The wicked have no problems. They don't suffer. They're at ease. And he was believing the wrong story about his own life and about the world around him. But then, when he went to the sanctuary, when he went to the temple, and he worshiped, everything changed. While in the temple, in worshiping, he started to be reminded of the true story of all that is going on. He was reminded of what God is really doing, even though it may not look like that to him right now through his eyes. And then Asaph was encouraged. You see, when he was believing the wrong story, he was depressed. But when he remembered the true story, he began to find joy even in the middle of suffering. You see, Asaph's circumstances, all the things that were making him suffer, those did not change at all. What changed is he went from believing the wrong story to believing the true story. And youth, that's one of our biggest problems. Continually believing the wrong story about the world around us and about our own lives. We have to start to believe. We start to believe the stories of the world around us, that the world around us tells us, and we don't believe the true story that God tells us. We believe the false stories that the world around us tells us. And by the way, I'm using these two books because the world around us tells us a false story. This book by Albert Camus is a false story about the world and the universe in which we live. But many, many, many people believe this story, and they live like they believe this story, even if they haven't read The Myth of Sisyphus. It is a false story that we get from movies, songs, news, and many other places. Yet the Bible tells us the true story, and we need to remember it. So, our new topic is going to be the Christian story, remembering it, and what it tells us, and how it shows us that these stories, turn it this way, these stories are false, so that we can understand and look at the world through the lens of the true story of God. So, to help us and to do that, we are going to study, drumroll please, the Narnia Chronicles. I know that probably doesn't surprise many of you, but the thing is, these are not just good stories. They are the Christian story told from a different perspective. So they help us immensely to understand our own story and to see how these other stories are false. Now, we'll talk more about why that is in the next lesson. But in the meantime, go read Psalm 73. Use that this week. Think about the story that you tell yourself about who you are, about the world around you, about who God is. And ask yourself, is that the true story? You guys think about that. And I'll see you again on Wednesday.